The point of the wilderness, for everybody who's going through a wilderness season, where you're not where you're promised to be, where you feel like you've left something in faith and you don't know what's going on, and you're like, God, where are you? Do you hear me? Do you see me? Why have you forsaken me? I'm going through all these things. Why is this not ended, that not ended? And the point of it all, I didn't know this, but at the point of it all, the point of a wilderness season is for you to learn how to be obedient and dependent on God. That is the point. Obedient and dependent. And you, everybody that's watching me, you determine how long that wilderness season lasts. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. God has a minimum amount. God has a minimum amount of time that you could be in the wilderness. But you, my friends, who are all watching, you determine how long your wilderness season maximally will last. In Deuteronomy 8:2 and 3, it says, remember every road that God led you on for these 40 years in the wilderness, pushing you to your limits, testing you so that he would know what you are made of, whether you would keep his commandments or not. He put you through those hard times. He made you go hungry. He fed you with manna, something neither you nor your parents knew anything about. So you would learn that men and women don't live by bread alone only. We live by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Exodus 13:17-18 says, it so happened that after Pharaoh released the people, God didn't lead them by the road through the land of the Philistines, which was the shortest route. For God thought if the people encounter war, they'll change their minds and go back to Egypt. So God led the people on the wilderness road, looping around to the Red Sea. The Israelites left Egypt in military formation. And in Exodus 14:4, it says, I'll make Pharaoh's heart stubborn again so that he'll chase after them. I'll use Pharaoh and his army to put my glory on display. Then the Egyptians will realize that I am God, and that's what happened. All right. So the whole point, as we can see, is he's saying in the scriptures that that the wilderness season was to push them to their limits. That's the point. He pushes you to your limits. Some of you guys may be going through a wilderness season. You're in a waiting season. You've been given a promise and you're like, okay, God, you gave me the promise. Now, why is life so hard? Why can't I hear you? What is happening right now? I feel like I'm lost. I feel like I'm alone. I feel like I can't trust nobody. Why is this happening? And he's saying it's because I'm pushing you intentionally to your limits. I'm testing you so that I know what you're made of. Whether or not you would default to you and what you normally do, or whether you'll default to me. It's easy to follow me when everything is going well. It's easier when you feel like I'm doing what you want me to do. I'm testing you right now. I'm turning the heat up because I want to see what comes to the surface. Y'all, in the Bible, the process of refining is likened to gold. And if you know anything about gold and how gold is purified, it is put in a furnace and the furnace is heated up to 7,000 degrees. 7,000 degrees. And when it's heated up to 7,000 degrees, what separates is the gold and its impurities. The impurities are rise to the surface while the gold is being melted to be able to to purify the gold. Okay. What God does is that he turns the heat up in our lives to 7,000 degrees, and the impurities, the things that you struggle with, the things that have been hidden. You might have said, I haven't been angry like this in a million years. I thought I was so patient. I thought I was so kind. I thought I didn't have an anger problem. I thought I was so flexible. All these things you thought about yourself. When the heat turns on, you start understanding aspects of self that you thought you didn't have a problem with. You know, I'm not gonna lie. When the heat turned on in my life, y'all, I realized I wasn't that patient. I realized that I can be very irritable. I realized that I have a real fear of disappointment, that I don't like being vulnerable. like y'all, an intense fear of being disappointed. Intense. It to the point that it paralyzes me. Intense, where I constantly need reassurance, and I'm so afraid of being wrong, and I'm so afraid of letting somebody into my life. I'm just being honest with y'all. That is what God has shown me in this season, that I'm so afraid of disappointment, so afraid of it, that it literally paralyzes me to where I can't move in the ways that God want me to move. But it completely gets in the way of faith. Because if I'm so afraid of being disappointed, and I'm so afraid of putting myself out there, and I'm so afraid of those things, I'm literally in a position where I cannot please God. Why is that, Sam? Because if I'm afraid of being disappointed, that means I'm not going to put myself in what they say about the fear of disappointment, which I'm going to give you guys some symptoms of that. There's a real definition. There's a real phobia of being disappointed, and I probably meet that. I probably meet it. But the fear of disappointment is excessive need for reassurance, intense fear of being wrong, so much so that it paralyzes you. A risk aversion. You're risk aversive. You won't enter into situations where they may fail or the outcome is unknown. You're very hesitant to go into any situation that you might fail or the outcome is unknown. You struggle with feeling like you're good enough. You're preoccupied with your perceived imperfections. And last is emotional detachment. A lot of people that struggle with the fear of disappointment, they're very guarded. It's like the walls of Jericho are up around their heart. They're very guarded. They're overly protective of themselves being vulnerable. Because a lot of times when you struggle with the fear of disappointment, you've been disappointed. And you've been disappointed in a traumatic way. And it doesn't just start with a heartbreak in adulthood. That could be one of the reasons. But you were disappointed perpetually as a child. So you do things to protect yourself from feeling that way again. And I realized that as I was at this point in my life where I didn't even realize that I've struggled with this, was that I will do things to protect myself from being disappointed by people. And that means I put this wall up and I don't allow myself to get through those things. And so because of that fear, that actually puts me in a position where I'm not likely to walk in faith. Because if I'm afraid of putting myself in a risk-aversive situation that doesn't seem safe, that means I'm unlikely to actually walk in faith. Faith is the evidence of things that are not seen. It's the assurance of things that we hope for, the evidence of things that we cannot see. Literally, my fear gets in the way of faith because I'm not the kind of person, and I've been taught to be the kind of person that only makes decisions based upon what I know, what I see. I'm not one to really make a whole lot of faith jumps. That's just not who I am as a person. That's not who I am as a person. So a lot of times what I've learned is that my faith, I can't really truly walk in faith. That's what I've learned. So anyway, when you are so guarded and you're so protective of self, it makes it very challenging for you to walk in faith, because walking in faith is literally not knowing what the outcome is literally not having an assurance of what the only assurance you have is the God that you serve. That if God told you to do it, that he's going to get you through it, that there's a reason for everything that he calls you to. Right. But it's not like, oh, I'm going to invest in this company because I see that they're doing X, Y, and Z. It's literally taking a step of faith. And when you're unwilling to take steps of faith because you've been hurt in the past, it puts you in a position where you can't walk in faith. Right? You're not going to be willing to put yourself out there. You're not going to be willing to do certain things because you're looking for a sure thing. Before you sink your teeth into it, it's got to be sure. It's got to be right. You got to be reassured 1,002 times to make sure you're making the right decision. That's what that is. Okay. So God led them into the wilderness to figure out what was in them, right? And that's in Genesis 15. Where are we at? Yes, hold on, excuse me. Deuteronomy, excuse me. He did that to push people to their limits, testing you so that he would know what you were made of and whether or not you would keep his commandments or not. So he wanted to see what was going on, like what was inside them. And unfortunately, the Israelites did not pass this test, okay? They did not pass this test. So we'll move on from there. And we see that he did things intentionally to show who he was. So he put them in situations where only God could get them out in order to prove to them who he was. He intentionally did that. He intentionally put them in situations that they could not save themselves. They could not get themselves out of. For them to develop a relationship with him where they were dependent upon him. That was the whole point. The point was to develop such a relationship with God that you are now dependent upon him. And what happens is a lot of people decide to default to themselves. That when you cook it, things go up against the wall, all else fails, they default to themselves. That's not faith. That's faith in you. That's not faith in God. Faith is literally walking in something, walking through the valley of the shadow of death, that you will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort and protect me. You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. You honor me by anointing my head with oil. My cup overflows with blessings. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. It's walking through the shadow of the valley of death, not knowing death is dark, meaning I'm walking through this dark valley. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know where I'm going. I have no idea how I'm going to get through this, but I'm trusting. That's the point. That's the point. The point of all of it was to test the Israelites, to test their resolve, and to see what they were made of. Okay? And to let them know that they can trust God, to let them be dependent upon their creator. Right? That was the relationship that was supposed to be built in the wilderness.